Alrighty, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Meghan Veeley. I'm a naturalist at East Harbor State Park and Marblehead Lighthouse State Park. I work with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. I have been working with the Department of Natural Resources for 2 years now. Right after I graduated from the University of Toledo, working with ODNR was actually my internship. So I got my foot in the door that way. But now I get to educate people about native life, including wildlife and also plant life and historical, which is where we'll be today with the Marblehead Lighthouse and learning about its history. So the title we're going to have today is If Buildings Could Talk, and What Would the Marblehead Lighthouse Say? So this is going to be a large history base, mostly just about the lighthouse and the surrounding areas. So then, where is Marblehead Lighthouse located? It is located in the western basin of Lake Erie. If you guys know where Cedar Point is, you can actually see Cedar Point from the top of the lighthouse. It is right over to the right-hand side. It is on the Marblehead Peninsula, which is also located a little bit, if you know Port Clinton as well, that's a very big touristy area. And also we have the coordinates there, which is 41.5365 degrees north and 82.7125 degrees west. Why this exact peninsula? So Lake Erie is incredibly dangerous. It is one of the most dangerous of the Great Lakes because it is so shallow and having storms created suddenly. It is also incredibly rocky. So right off of the shoreline, it's usually only about 10 to 12 feet deep. It is quite shallow. And Lake Erie also has the effects, and the islands do as well. If you are at the lighthouse, some days when it's 70, it can be warm enough for you to start sweating, and other days enough where it feels like you need a jacket. The winds also go into effect there. We have the northeast winds where all the water comes from Canada's side over to the lighthouse side, and it just increases the water levels, and it can get pretty dangerous pretty quickly. Now, how was the lighthouse built? The United States Congress provided $5,000 towards the construction of the light in 1819. So like any other budget and any other building project, it went over budget. So the Congress provided more money later on, which the total created was $6,520. And you can actually see the original lighthouse that is on the side. It was constructed by William Kelly, another unnamed man, and his 12-year-old son. There is some debate on whether he was 11 or 12, though most documents state that he was 12. The construction took 11 weeks to build, so from September 1821 to November 1821. The base of the lighthouse was 25 feet in diameter with 5 feet thick walls. The entire height is about 50 foot. The beacon was lit on June 24th of 1822. Now, what was a lighthouse originally made out of? Limestone. So limestone, sorry, my screen went blank there. There we go. Limestone is native to the area. The picture that I have is actually the Marblehead Quarry. They ship out multiple places, though the quarry was not in existence yet. It was about another 10 years after the lighthouse was created, so they used local limestone. It is able to hold large amounts of moisture, and being right against the lake, that is definitely useful. It is common in construction, and it's also common for people to build with and use in their front yards if you are right against the water. It is Columbus limestone, which has fossils from the Devonian period, which was mostly fish fossils and when creatures were starting to get their little legs and coming out. Now, what powered the light? So originally, the name was the Sandusky Bay Light, since it was against the Sandusky Bay. It was a main head. So that way people can know, hey, don't hit the rocks here when you're going into the Sandusky Bay. But now it's known as the Marblehead Lighthouse. It was powered by whale oil and lard. So we know Lake Erie, it is not salt water, so there are no whales there. So whale oil had to be imported in. It got incredibly expensive later on, so it was used for a short amount of time. The lights, there were 13 whale oil lights that were used, and they were checked every 3 to 4 hours. It took about 50 pounds of whale oil every trip to go and check to make sure all the lights were still on. And also the lard was used from 1821 to 1858. So it did have a short span since it got very expensive. They equated out today about a gallon would have been about $200, and they went through 50 pounds in about 3 to 4 hours. It definitely cost them a pretty penny later on. Now, the first lighthouse keeper. So Benijah Wolcott, he was the first lighthouse keeper and served from 1822 to 1832. He was a Revolutionary War veteran, a surveyor, and a self-declared pioneer. His original house was about 2 miles away from Marblehead Light. So he did have a permanent residence, but he also had a building on the property that was made out of limestone that he used during the main times that the lake was used. So when the lake wasn't completely iced over. As the keeper, he maintained the property, ensuring that the light was lit. He organized, oh goodness, that was words, organized boat rescue missions. Since Lake Erie is incredibly dangerous, he had a high vantage point and was able to organize the town to go and help people. He also documented the weather patterns and shipwrecks. There are quite a few shipwrecks that happened in Lake Erie. This placard is from his home that is 2 miles away from the Marblehead Lighthouse, right on the Marblehead Peninsula. You can actually go and explore that house, but sadly that is not a part of us. That is the Ottawa County Historical Society. But they do a lot of cool tours and a whole bunch of like dress up events where you can go in and they'll have how this life worked. It's pretty fun to go and watch. Now, Benijah and his son had to deal with the cholera outbreak. This had multiple, I know the picture states 1849, though there were multiple ones previously. That was just when the Sandusky area got hit. So cholera is a bacterial disease that can spread from contaminated food and water. So imagine you're on a boat and you have a person or a body, most of the time, since you're on a boat, you had rationed items that could contaminate your entire crew. Most of the times, they didn't want something that was going to kill off their entire crew. They could be treated, but it wasn't the easiest to treat back then, so they would just chuck the body into the water. It got rid of their problem in a sense, morbid, yes, but the bodies had to end up somewhere, which would have been the peninsula or any rocky outcrop. So the bodies just washed up onto the peninsula. Since Benijah was the one that was in charge of maintaining the lands, he and his son William went and carried bodies, buried them in a cemetery close by, but they sadly died from this. So he only was a keeper for about 10 years before his wife Rachel took over. She was the first female lighthouse keeper at Marblehead Lighthouse and also the first female lighthouse keeper on the Great Lakes entirely, which is a super cool fact to have. She was the second lighthouse keeper and took over immediately after her husband passed. She was a keeper from 1832 to 1834. So she did remarry to Jeremiah von Bonschotten. Wow, it's a fun name to say. But he became the third lighthouse keeper. They did not stay together. There is a little bit of where did she go? Where is her cemetery plot? It's still unknown at the moment. They split up and Jeremiah went back to Huron, which is just a hop and a skip from Marblehead. And it's said that Rachel stayed with her son, but nothing else is known from there. We had multiple other keepers. So this is just keepers 3 through 7. So we had Jeremiah von Bonschotten. He was the third keeper, and he became the keeper after marrying Rachel Wolcott. We have Roderick Williston. He was the fourth keeper from 1841 to 1843. He was a councilman in Sandusky, Ohio. It is easier and faster to go across the lake to get to Sandusky than it is to drive it at this time. So he was pretty close by. We have Colonel Charles Drake. He was the fifth keeper from 1843 to 1849. There is one newspaper article that called him a pompous individual and a very eccentric gentleman of the old school, which means he was very gentlemanly. He just had his little quirks. And that is the only document that I could find on him at all. Then we have Captain Lodovick Brown. He was the sixth lighthouse keeper from 1849 to 1853. And next was Jared B. Keyes, who was the seventh keeper from 1853 to 1859. So we had multiple changes in fuel. So the lighthouse changed from using whale oil to lard oil and later to coal oil and kerosene. So coal oil and kerosene were used from 1858 to 1923. The image on the side shows the different light sources that were used. We'll get into a little bit more of it later. So we had 4 different light sources that were mainly used. We are still that pretty little green light at the bottom, which I'll explain in just a short while. The Fresnel lens. So the Fresnel lens was put in 1858 and was used until 1972. There were multiple different Fresnel lenses that were used. So the original one was a 4th order, which weighed about 600 pounds. We believe there are 3 different Fresnel lenses that were being used. The second one, we have no idea where it went. They believe it was taken for parts and spread out all across Michigan and Lake Erie, but it was just hearsay. There's not very many documents that support that. And the 2nd and 3rd order are a 3.5 order lens, which is what's in the picture. And if you are looking at my video, what is directly behind me. So it was able to focus light. As you can see, the light is being spread and dispersed across it. That is just from an outside source. It is a magnifier. So if you have a light behind it, it will shine it very brightly. Then we have keepers 8 through 11. So we have O.L. Dayton. He was the 8th keeper from 1859 through 1861. Then we have Thomas Dyer, who was the 9th keeper from 1861 to 1865. Then we have Russell Douglas, who was the 10th keeper from 1865 to 1872. Now, Thomas J. Keyes, you might realize you said the last name Keyes before. Yes, indeedy. He was the 11th keeper from 1872 to 1873, but he's also the son of Jared B. Keyes, who was the 7th lighthouse keeper. So he took up the same path as his father did with being a lighthouse keeper just a couple years later. Now, changing names. Originally, it was called the Sandusky Bay Light due to being the landmark that aided the sailors into the Sandusky Bay. The Sandusky Bay was used for trading, and a lot of their items came through by boat. They would trade out their furs, they would trade out their limestone, they would trade out their goods, anything that they could get, they would disperse it through the Sandusky Bay and outward. So it was incredibly necessary for them to have the lighthouse light there. It's also understandable why they called it the Sandusky Bay Light. Though in 1870, the name was changed to the Marblehead Lighthouse. The lands that the Marblehead Lighthouse was on was named Marblehead due to how they got the land. So previously, people from a different state had their land disrupted and they moved over to Ohio, and they just renamed it the exact same place where they came from, which is where you get Catawba, the Firelands, and Marblehead. So they just took the same names, placed it down there, and they were able to get the lighthouse name changed to match the location. Now, the McGees. These guys did an incredible amount of work. These 2 silhouettes that are here were actually from our 200-year celebration. It was in front of a cute cafe, and there was a QR code where you could scan it and get information about them. So George McGee, he was the 12th lighthouse keeper from 1873 to 1896. And his wife, Joanne McGee, was also a lighthouse keeper. She was the 13th from 1890 to 1903, though she, of course, helped before that, but that was the official time frame that she had. So she was the 2nd female lighthouse keeper. So that was an incredible thing that we had 2 female lighthouse keepers. It was mostly a male-dominated field due to the incredibly hard labor that it was, and also the maintenance that it took. They requested funding for multiple projects on the property, and they succeeded in making a large number of changes, which we will get into right here. So they built a new keeper's house. The previous one for the last couple of years before 1880, it was drafty, it was leaky, and they were claiming that they were sleeping in the carriage house instead of the house since it was more habitable. In 1880, it was officially deemed inhabitable, the house. So it was just an original limestone house on the property. Many people refer to it as a limestone shack. So it doesn't have the proper pretty name to it. But what you're seeing now is the keeper's house that was redone in 1880, though an attachment was put on later on. They painted a layer of stucco and a white layer of paint over the outside of the lighthouse to protect the limestone in 1880 as well. It was getting attacked from basically a whole bunch of wind, a whole bunch of rain, water, the ice shoves, which we get quite a bit of, all the ice that accumulates in the water as the waves push it forward, just slam into the lighthouse and start to erode away the limestone underneath. They renovated the keeper's house again in 1896 for an additional upstairs and the sides, which was the house the lighthouse keeper's assistants. There's not much document, if anything, about the keeper's assistants, though there are a couple keepers later on that were assistants previously, which will be in a hot minute there. The lighthouse renovations. So the major renovation began in 1897. So in the document, I'll show you a closer up of that one in a minute. So they added 15 feet to the lighthouse. They took down a part of the platform and rebuilt, so it brought it to about 65 feet tall. They added a cast iron staircase. It is an open graded cast iron spiral staircase. To get to the platform, it had 77 steps, about 3.5 flights of stairs. To get all the way up to the light is about 89 stairs. So then they also added an inner brick wall. So they created that to support the Fresnel lens and later lenses used. The brick is still in the lighthouse today. You can sort of see in this illustration where the brick continues upwards and where they added the additional piece. And let's see, there's a closer image. So the original lighthouse, it was just the regular, and then it looks like a cut off flat top, and they just put a little light on top. So they did a couple renovations here and there, mostly masonry work, adding in the lights, which was a fourth order previously mentioned in 1858. Then in the 1898, the masonry work was put in. They added the frames, the brick frames around the lights and the windows and the inner piece as a support. In 1901, we'll get into those, but it's kind of cool to see how the lighthouse changed throughout time and see that it's not the original, well, it's the original, but it's also not the exact original by how it looks. Then we have the final lighthouse keepers, which were Charles Hunter. He was the 14th keeper with the longest term. He is the one previously mentioned who was the lighthouse keeper's assistant. He was a keeper for 30 years, so from 1903 to 1933. We know the most about Charles. His family has donated multiple items into our museum. So we know that he was musically inclined, so he would play instruments. He also wrote music, which we have a piece of his music in our archive. He also painted. He did woodworking. He created his own clocks and grandfather clocks and a whole bunch of other woodworking. He loved to keep himself busy. He did a large number of landscaping. He is known for being the most creative out of all of our lighthouse keepers. And Mr. Hunter, during his time, the light was switched over to incandescent electricity, which was used from 1923 and was used until 2013. So Edward Herman was our final lighthouse keeper. He was the 15th from oh my goodness, I can't words today, 1933 to 1943. Now we're getting into the time where we have more documentation. The Coast Guard control. Coast Guard took over the light. They became our final lighthouse keeper, unofficial lighthouse keeper. We call him the 16th keeper. We had 15 major, and then Coast Guard took over. In 1943, the Marblehead Lighthouse, well, my goodness, the U.S. Coast Guard at the Marblehead, Ohio, took over this land. They had it as a side property. They did manage it, though it was one of their side projects. They didn't do a lot with the property. So the Coast Guard would randomly open up the lighthouse for tours, though they were randomly stated and they're only open for a few hours at a time. We do have some volunteers with the Historical Society that actually remember when the Coast Guard would open up the lighthouse for tours. Many of them said that the line to get into the lighthouse was all the way back and towards the road, which is a little bit of a distance, but if they were piling up that much to go into the lighthouse that hasn't been opened to the public for many years, it was an amazing start for the tours that we do later in the future. They did a lot of upgrades to the light, mostly just making sure it was lit, checking over everything. They upgraded the light to an automatic light, an automated light in 1958. They are still in charge of the light now, though there was a scare on whether we'd actually be able to keep the keeper's house and the lighthouse. So the keeper's house was going to be set to be used as fire practice for the Marblehead Fire Department in 1970. There are so many different takes on this story, mostly by mouth. So I have heard personally somebody say they took the match out of somebody's hands and threw their body against the house. We had people saying that they purposely put the hay right up against the house, that they were going to use it as kindling. It was ready to go. Other people say they used that for insulation to keep the basement of the house warm. There's also been a couple that have stated that they tried to protest and they sat on the hay that was used for the either insulation or kindling and would not move. They made sure. So it gets very dramatic depending on who you ask on how this all went down. Though officially overall, they decided, no, we're not going to be using this as a burn practice. We will let it be. This is a historical place. We are not going to mess with it. The image on the side that we have is a picture of the lighthouse from 1970. As you notice, it's not the pretty white from the other ones. The stucco gunite mix was taken down, later to be replaced. And you can see the windows around were still painted that white outside, which will be exposed later on to have the natural brick exposed. Now, becoming a state park. So once Coast Guard decided we don't really want to do the upkeep on this property, let's put it up for bid and see who wants to utilize this property. We'll still maintain the official light, so they get the top layer, but somebody else gets to manage the property, the actual lighthouse house, and a whole bunch of the other lands as well. So ODNR was given the option to purchase the property in 1998, making it a state park in the exact same year. It was the 73rd state park. We have 75 state parks now, so it is still one of the newer ones that are out there. The Marblehead Lighthouse Historical Society was created in 2000. With the help from the Historical Society, the first floor of the keeper's house was changed into a museum. They have different rooms and sections. So one room is about the light and about the keepers and the information that they were able to gather. We are actually still gathering more. We have an archivist who has been helping us. She works with the Marblehead Library. She has been digging up a whole bunch of facts for us and figuring out, hey, maybe this is not exactly as what we thought it was. It's amazing to learn all the new facts that have been coming out. But there is one room in the keeper's house that is just about the lighthouse itself, about the keepers and any information that we have from the families that they have donated things. We have another room that explains the limestone, all the different rocks that are around, why the Great Lakes are necessary and why everything happened, and also about some of the factories that were in Marblehead that kind of upstarted the whole area. And then a gift shop, which I will get into in just a tiny bit. So my goodness, I'm losing my words. So on June 1st, 2000, the park was open to the public. And, wrong button. Open to the public, they were able to view the museum and have tours and explore the lighthouse. The tours began just then for only weekend use. Many of our volunteers, there's only a few that are still volunteering with us, though we have a handful that were originally there. They would only do weekend tours, but that has slowly shifted to adding a few more days and then maybe adding an extra day. Okay, why don't we just do 7 days a week? They did ask the town of Marblehead. They sent out a short survey for them to turn into the mailroom and be like, hey, how long or how would you prefer the tours be open for? Would you want them from 9 to 6 p.m.? Do you want them from noon to 5 p.m.? Do you want them from noon to 4 p.m.? What about 1 to 7? They gave them a whole bunch of options. So it was officially Marblehead citizens that decided we want it only open from noon to 4. It is a very touristy town and a lot of snowbirds live there. So they decide we don't want to open too much to draw it does draw a lot of people in. It is one of the most photographed and items in any of the state parks in Ohio, which is amazing. So we did add another light later on. So we switched over from incandescent electricity to regular with a 20-watt LED bulb that was made in New Zealand. That was done in 2013. So if you look, that is actually one of our older lights. We have at least 3 different lights since I have been there, which has only been about 2 years now, almost 3. So that is one of them. The light shines all the way around, so it does a bright flash. It is kind of like that Scooby-Doo green right before the show starts and you get the original theme song going, but it is a very bright light. Then the light is light sensitive, which makes it super easy. So if it gets too dark, boop, it pops itself right back on. If it gets too bright, it'll turn itself off. So if we get a storm in the middle of the day, I was just there a couple days ago and we got a pretty decent storm and it turned itself on and you could just see the green flash just shine all throughout the park. So it is automatic. The Coast Guard only needs to check it once a year. They have their own little backpacks and everything go right on up to the top of the lighthouse. They can fiddle with it. They can reorder lights. They also have temporary lights if needed, which was needed just a year or so ago. So then it is still operating. It is the longest continuously operating lighthouse on the Great Lakes, which is amazing. And it is green, mentioned previously. It blinks once every 6 seconds. So you can actually time it. It's very fun. And the coast, my goodness. You can time it. It is beautiful. Many people have also edited the light to have it be different and makes it great. So the life-saving station. That is a historical society's project. It is something that he was the head of the Historical Society, Dennis Kennedy. This was his pet project. He was in love with this. The blueprints that they found were based off of one that was in Chicago, though it was the same blueprint that was used in many different locations across the Great Lakes. This one is an exact replica as best as we could get it. There was a life-saving station about 2 miles down the road, which was used where the life-saving efforts previously mentioned. So this building has a lot of information based on the Coast Guard and based on Lake Erie. They also have a refurbished life-saving vessel that they were able to buy and make it their own. They can actually pull that out in the summer and let people explore. We have some of the old life jackets that they were able to use, which were made out of cork, and then the plastic and the material on top, which is super cool. They also have a couple videos about how they launched the nets, how everything was created. They have a small little binoculars that you can look out and it will show you what's outside the life-saving station and allows you to kind of realize, oh, this is how this would have been used. Oh, this is why they have this random door here. So it really gets a good perspective on how everything would have worked previously. Now, this is where I officially began. This was my very first season with Marblehead Lighthouse, was in 2019. So this project was started the day after Labor Day. The stucco gunite mix was replaced. Let me move that out of my way there. So the stucco gunite outer shell was replaced. They had to peel it all off. They had large bins that were on the ground that they were throwing the stucco onto. There are still little rocks all around the lighthouse that have this little whitish painting on it that is actually the stucco gunite mix that was put on about the later 1970s, early 1980s. So that's really cool because previously there were cracks all throughout it that was discolored. There were some grasses that were actually growing out on top of the door, which was a funny sight for us to see. It was kind of like, oh, nature is taking back over the lighthouse, though it was not very aesthetically pleasing one bit. So all these scaffolding were to remove the stucco, the old stucco, and put up a new layer. And as you notice, it kind of looks like a giant marshmallow in the middle picture. It was incredibly cold when they were trying to set it. So it was about just above freezing point that year. So they had heaters on every single level trying to dry the lighthouse before the lighthouse weekend that we have in October. So the second Saturday in October is Lighthouse Fest for Marblehead Lighthouse. So that one day is the only day outside of our normal tour times that it will be open to the public from 9 to 4 p.m. and tours every 20 minutes. So they were trying their absolute best to get this outside beautiful and ready and done before October. So sadly, it was too cold for the stucco. It was not setting properly. So these outer shell pieces were not completed until June. Wow, goodness, it was January by the time they took it down. So we were unable to do tours that year, but during that day, it was about 30 degrees. There was not very many people out and about trying to get pictures of the lighthouse. So it was fun to kind of look at it and figure out, yes, this kind of looks like a giant marshmallow, but at least we are being able to see history being made yet again. Now, public restrooms. I can't tell you how excited I was about these. So previously there were 2 porta potties on the property, and if the wind was hitting right at the lighthouse, these were in the parking lot just a little bit behind the keeper's house, which is a good distance. If the wind was hitting it just right, you could smell those porta potties. It was not swell at all. So the project was beginning at the end of 2019. They had the blueprints, but then COVID hit in 2020. So they had to be postponed just a little bit, but they were almost completely ready to go right before the 2021 season started. The inside bathrooms are amazing because it is air conditioned. It has a water refill station, and also there's actually a place to change your kids now. It was a little bit difficult to find a place for that, though we do have it open all year round now. So even if you come up in the winter, because the park is open 24/7, you're allowed to come at night. Though the buildings won't be open since they're mostly volunteer run, but you can go and explore the property. You can take pictures of the light, paint it if you want. I usually go over there with my dinner or an ice cream in the busy season and just sit there and watch the light and watch the waves. You can also fish nearby. So thankfully no one has used the restrooms at the fish cleaning station, but there have been a couple people that have utilized that bathroom and it is super nice. We also have informational displays in there as well. We did have a newer little podium that was there that displayed the events for our 200-year celebration. So here we go, 200 years. We are the longest continuously operating lighthouse on the Great Lakes. This summer made it the 200 year, which was an amazing thing to be able to see. Right now you're looking at a mural that a couple of artists did from Marblehead. This is right as soon as you get into Marblehead on the right-hand side if you're coming from 163 and also 269. The Historical Society and the State Park collaborate with multiple events throughout the whole summer. So they had a large number of free concerts. There's almost a free concert every other week. And we were able to have the lighthouse open and staffed until right when that concert started. So you could actually go up later on. The latest time we were able to let people go up was 7 p.m., which was super cool. Then we also had a bunch of new vendors. So we had people that were native to our Marblehead area and also a few others that created new displays, created new posters, signs. We have a couple geology bits in there as well. They were able to sell their items. They were able to do paintings, which was mixed in with their vendors and crafts. So you were able to paint the Marblehead Lighthouse. And if you wanted to, you could have sold that painting right there and made money on it, which was super fun. We also had food carts, which was the best. But it was so fun to be able to see everybody, see how many people would actually come out, because this was a free event. You could park your car, walk right on in, and just enjoy basically any bands that was there. And they're mostly, you could face the water at the same time and just hear the waves. The events were so fun to go to, though I doubt we're going to do very many more. It was a very labor-intensive process. Though it was done with love, we enjoyed every minute of it. But it's a long ways away from another big landmark, say 300-year celebration. We have many updates and upgrades that have been done to this little area. So our gift shop was recently overtaken by an amazing woman. She is now a higher up member in our historical society. She has created a whole bunch of new items. She has collaborated with so many artists and has added so much. She has created a eBay page. So when COVID hit, basically the lighthouse, there was no revenue coming in, and we also put a large down payment onto that bathroom. So they're like, how can we still basically turn a little bit of a profit to add to our next project if we're closed for a year? It was a little bit scary, I'm not going to lie, looking at the numbers, but she created an eBay page, which is still up and going. I have ordered quite a few things on there, even though I work there. It is a guilty pleasure, but the eBay page is open all year round. They can ship items. We have actually shipped all the way up to Canada. We have shipped over to Europe a couple of times too, which is super cool. And we are working on accepting credit card at the tower. It has been a little bit tricky since we are on the peninsula and there's no power lines that really go directly to the lighthouse. So we are collaborating and trying to get that process to work because we've been a cash only at the lighthouse tower. You can of course use card in the gift shop since it has better Wi-Fi, but we are working at getting credit cards at the tower because it was a turn away if people didn't have cash, which I know I don't usually carry cash. We had to send a large number of people to the Marblehead Bank, which is a mile down the road, to use their ATM, which was a little bit inconvenient for people. Completely understandable. So we are working towards trying to bridge a couple more gaps. And there are many more projects that are in the works. Lighthouse tours. This is where I usually am. I am the one that's giving the tours at the base of the tower. I work with a couple naturalist aides, a couple historical educators, and a couple natural resource workers. And also a large number of volunteers. So we are open Memorial Day weekend through Labor Day. We are open every day from noon to 4 p.m. Our tours happen every 20 minutes. The last tour goes up at 3:40 and it comes down by 4, so that way we're able to make sure everything is all good. So the tours are $3 cash per person for everyone 6 and over. 5 and under is free. We do have to worry a little bit about the baby carriers on the back. Since it does get a little bit steep, as you notice, we have the open graded cast iron spiral staircase right there. Yes, that is the one that was put in many years ago during our major renovation when the brick was put in. And you can also see my coworker's foot in that picture, which I find hilarious, but you're able to see all the way through. But baby carriers, we have to be a little bit careful since it does get a little bit steep. We don't want a kid to bonk their head. And then I finished a smidgen early, but do you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, any happy stories?
Oh, thank you, Megan. That was great. Making me look forward to summertime.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I can't wait for it to start back up again. It's one of my favorite things to do in the summer.
All right, let me look for questions to see if we have any. Well, I know I have several questions. Of course, now my brain just poofed. I should have wrote them down for myself. So I know you mentioned before we went live that they're painting the inside of the lighthouse.
Of the keeper's house. So
Oh,
the
the
house
keeper's
is
house.
incredibly
Okay.
old.
Yeah.
So the house is from 1880. So the walls are a little bit cracky. So they were patching those up, putting a fresh coat of paint on there. They are doing a couple other renovations. They are adding lights to all the displays. So we have a large number of just displays that are put directly into the ground. They put a green light behind the Fresnel Lens, which I am at a different Fresnel Lens right now, but they have a light that's hidden back there that they can turn on, so that way you can see the amplification, which is super cool because sometimes you don't want to be out super late at night to actually see it go on in real life. So it's cool to see an example and understand that the light does go a very large distance. It goes 11 nautical miles or 13 statute miles. And this one is just a tiny little green light. And our light now is pretty big. It's about that large. We did have to get a new light recently, not last year, but the year before the lighthouse was struck by lightning, which fried out the light, but Coast Guard was there that day, was able to put in a temporary light and get a new light in. So now it's back to being beautiful. We didn't lose any time and we were able to keep our 200-year celebration, but it's kind of fun to realize that There's a reason why we don't let people go up when it's storming, because that is a giant lightning rod.
Oh, that's no good. Oh no. I'm trying to figure. I think something happened to my internet. Oh, there it goes. It went weird for a minute, and I was like, what's going on? So I had someone ask. So I'm guessing, does like the lighthouse have a Facebook page?
Yes, so there is the Marblehead Lighthouse Historical Society's page. They get to update it a little bit more. I'm in the process of getting my name put onto the State Parks Lighthouse page, but both of them are available. And there's also a page that you can Google, which is the historical page, and they post all the different page information. They are amazing. And if you have any questions, they'll be like, hey, reach out to us. Oh, if you need a naturalist for this, they'll just transfer it right over to me, and vice versa.
Awesome. I have another question here saying, have you seen any interesting wildlife near the lighthouse?
Yes, so our area is incredibly rocky, so we have a large number of limestone boulders that are right up against the lighthouse and travel down. We have a piece that has glacial grooves on it, which is super cool, but in those rocks, I actually see baby mink that play around because they do like the rocky areas that is between the waterways and also the forested areas. And if you go on the pathway that takes you from the lighthouse to the life-saving station and it's raining or even sprinkling, you find so many toads. There have been so many different colors. You just look down and you just have them all popping around and just staring at you. I have done a couple programs and I made sure it was raining that day so we could go and pick up the toads and kind of explain them. We had a deer last year that managed to get herself into the water right off the base of the lighthouse. So it was a Cinderella moment or Snow White moment where we just picked the deer out of the water and let her go. But we have had those. We get a lot of birds too. We are right near where they have the biggest week of birding, which is near McGee Marsh, which is about 20, 30-ish minutes down from there. So the warbler migration comes in. We have very territorial red-winged blackbirds that like to nest in our little branches there. They have been known to dive bomb people because the males get incredibly aggressive when there's babies. They just pull hair. They don't do anything. They just freak you out a little bit. We have put up signs. They have torn down our signs, so we kind of let them go. We have skunks there right now since it's breeding season. I have spotted a couple of them. And also I've had a couple of wood ducks that were on our wooden trail that is behind the life-saving station. It's a quarter-mile trail. It's very short, but I have had a duck staring down at me. It is something you don't expect when you're walking in a wooded trail. Get a duck? But yes, wood ducks love trees.
Yeah, wood ducks are very interesting. I'm lucky. I've a pair that usually try to scope out nesting cavities in my woods. So yeah, occasionally they're just like hanging out, looking down at you like, hey, what's up? All right. So has there ever been a boat or shipwreck there? I know you said there was a few. I mean, I don't know if there's been any like excursions to see any.
We have recently, it was about 8 years ago, had a boater not pay attention and landed right on the rocks going up to the light. That was two naturalists before I. Her name was Diane. She was like, do you want help getting this back? I can call officers. I can call coastal. Like, I can help you. And he goes, I got it. But it took about 3 hours. We get a lot of ski-doos that go real close to the lighthouse. I have actually had the number dialed for ODNR response to help because they have gotten so close. Though the major shipwrecks are a little bit farther out, like closer to Kelly Island side and towards South Bass Put-in Bay, which you can actually see from the top of the lighthouse and see while you're on property. And you can see Middle Bass too, but that one's kind of hidden. But none that I have seen, but there are historical ones that where shipping vessels have gotten into the rocks or a bad storm has happened and capsized. Recently, we've had, this was last year, where the ice got broken and about 6 people got trapped on ice.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
So that happens quite a bit. We are the most utilized Coast Guard location. So we see their orange vessel all the time. We see their helicopter all the time. And they just walk over and they'll just stare while they're at the lighthouse and be like, all right, go get that one. So we see them get pulled over, but thankfully none that are completely submerged.
Well, that's good. All right. So another question is, why did the earlier keepers only last 3 to 7 years in the job?
Yes, so quite a few of them actually became keepers at other locations. So out of the first 8, about 4 of them actually changed locations to work at another one. So Rachel Wolcott's second husband sold off a lot of her property and took the money and then left. So a couple of them had a couple schemes there, but majority, it was intensively hard labor. It was all mostly night shifts, but you had to work the day as well. And a large number of them had families, which made it incredibly difficult on the wife and the older siblings that had to take care of them. There was a couple of them that had almost 11 or 12 kids at one point, and it was a very intensive laboring job. So they would either transfer over to a different one where there are more lighthouse keepers to and aides to assist, or they just were like, I'm just going to go live in the city. I'll become a councilman instead. It paid a little bit better. Benijah only got $350 for the whole year, which back then was quite a bit of money. But looking at it nowadays, you're like, oh, I can see why.
Yeah, this is one probably dear to my heart because are there any spooky ghost stories associated with the lighthouse?
That is my favorite thing to talk about. So there are quite a few stories that like to be spread around, though I will admit I probably have added to them by doing some pranks at the lighthouse. So we have a volunteer, it's been a couple years ago now. He claims that he took a picture in the lighthouse window that's at the base. And in the background, it was that night, he claimed that in the flash, you could actually see Confederate soldiers. So the Battle of 1812 was right beside there, and also Johnson's Island, which was a holding location where there's a lot of unmarked bodies and graves. It's very interesting to visit, but also probably quite spooky. So there have been claims on that one. There was, I believe it was one of either Rachel's first marriage or second marriage, I can never remember which one, where one of their children actually drowned off of the lighthouse in the area. They were only about 13 months to about 2 years. It just gets incredibly dangerous. So there has been stories about hearing people going up and down the stairs. I have not witnessed that one yet. I have had plaster fall off and it scared the daylights out of people. I've had mice. So the keeper's house, there are quite a few things that make noises and groan. You can hear people walking downstairs if you're upstairs doing paperwork. The latch to the bathroom is a hook, and you can, we always say that it's the wind, but you can hear it like thump when you're in there, and you just go, all right, cool, the ghost is coming to get us. But it's kind of split on whether we have a large historical society that pops in where they're like, yeah, there's ghosts. And other people go, I'll let the ghost be, and you can do your thing. So it kind of depends on who you ask.
Okay. Another question is, does ice ever cover the lighthouse in the winter?
Not as cool as it does in the Michigan pictures where you can see the lighthouse and it has like the giant projectiles out. We mostly get ice shoves. So
Okay.
when the ice on Lake Erie gets broken and it all compiles, it shoves towards the lighthouse. The major one was 2014, where you could actually walk out 30 feet and you were still on ice, and there were just ice boulders and sheets and slabs everywhere. It was incredibly cool to watch. Though we do get a couple smaller ice shoves that move our boulders past our sidewalk, and we have to get a bobcat to push it back. But occasionally on a smaller scale, but not as cool as the ones that are dead set in the middle of the water.
All right. I thought of a question myself.
Okay.
Since you're so close to Lake Erie, and I've been like by Sandusky, like by Old Woman's Creek, and they have a lot of eagles. Do you have a lot of bald eagles out there?
Yes, so we are actually in an area where there is a large abundance. So on Route 2, just driving from Toledo to the lighthouse, I usually see at least 6 to 8 every single time. Though we do have a lot of eagle watchers. If you take the back route instead of going through the town, there are a bunch of nests that are along the way. And there's two that live over near East Harbor, which is about 6 miles away, that travel over. We also have a pair that bounces between Marblehead area and also Sandusky, Cedar Point area. So we do get a lot of them back and forth. We have seen it just in the past month, I could probably about 8 to 12. They just sit in the trees, they stare at you, and then they're good to go. So the fishermen do feed them in the summer. So there's a competition that's been happening around our area where you have a fish and an eagle flies up, you throw the fish up, and if the eagle grabs it, you get bragging rights for like the rest of your life. And I've had a couple of the fishermen tell me that one, so they're kind of hoping the fishermen come back so they don't have to work as hard for food, but it's still cool to see them. They should be having their eggs laid soon and
Yeah.
nesting, so they
Oh,
like to
I'm,
rebuild in the same location.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think I would definitely brag if I threw a fish in the air and was able to get a bald eagle to catch it. I would not let that down. All right,
I
let me
can't
just,
say I would either if I was.
yeah, that would probably be like the coolest Americana picture, is if you can get the bald eagle and the lighthouse at the same time.
Yes.
So I have a comment, not really a question, but it says excellent presentation in it. Thank you, Megan.
Thank
So I do
you.
have to say, I was very interesting, and it's kind of interesting about all the keepers, and then how like the Coast Guard kind of took it over. And I think it's interesting that the Coast Guard took it over in 1943 during World War II. Is that maybe like, did that play a role in them taking it over?
A little bit. So they wanted to use that as a vantage point. So they actually created a small little, they added to it where the edges are and made a little lookout area so they could spot if anything was going to go on. There was a couple locations that are within like 100 miles of Marblehead were actually on the targets for if something went bad, these areas could be used for bomb areas because it was such a hub. In the Sandusky Bay, a lot of people, they utilize that. It was a very big vessel area for things to go back and forth and trade routes, though once trains came in, it was a little bit less, but it was not their exact main reason, but they're like, ooh, we could utilize this. So they added on to it and looked out.
Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of interesting, like the timing, and I was like, there has to be some correlation. But thank you so much. I just do one last check just to make sure that I didn't miss anybody's question, because I don't want to miss anything. All right, I don't see anything. Thanks, everybody. And so keep an eye out on CRWP's Facebook page or our e-letter or our Instagram for our next speaker series. Next week we don't have one, but we have one on the 9th of March. It's hard to believe that March is this coming Wednesday. So I guess we'll find out if March comes in like a lion or like a lamb, or however that saying goes. All right, thank you, everybody. Everybody have a good night.
Thank you, guys.
All right, now I just